Subhadra ma'am, we can start.
Very good afternoon to one and all. On behalf of the Nutrition Society of India Mumbai chapter, myself, Dr. Subhadra Mandalika, extend a warm welcome to each one of you to today's webinar. While going through the list of participants registered for this webinar, we have noticed that several of you are non-members of NSI. Assuming that you may be requiring to know more about NSI, before beginning the scientific session, I would like to share with you few details about Nutrition Society of India and NSI Mumbai chapter as well. Let me share some slides with you. The Nutrition Society of India, popularly known as NSI, is established in 1967. This is an association of nutrition professionals, programmers, and policy makers from India and abroad. NSI is a recognized Indian representative of International Union of Nutritional Sciences through the adhering body, INSA, and Federation of Asian Societies of Nutrition. NSI is dedicated to disseminate the results of latest research in nutrition, both on basic and applied aspects. It also aims to analyze the current status of nutrition programs in the country and recommend appropriate strategies to promote nutrition of the community at large. There are around 35 zonal chapters of NSI through which NSI strives to achieve its objectives. I'm very proud to say that NSI Mumbai chapter is one of the most active zonal chapters. I request each one of you to visit our website and understand more about the activities that we carry out throughout the year. I have been saying on this platform on several occasions that our constructive efforts to fulfill the objectives of NSI, they continued even during the lockdown period. I'm going to give you very few glimpses of some of our activities that were carried out in the year 2021 from March onwards. But before that, let me tell you that over this period of 2 years of COVID-19 lockdown period, we have conducted more than 50 webinars, which included 26 and above standalone webinars, that is individual sessions, and 4 very important and very interesting webinar workshop series, and each one including 6 to 10 different webinar sessions. I'm very happy to share with you that we have uploaded most of the sessions of these webinars on our website, and during all our webinars, evidence-based information has been shared by eminent experts from India and abroad, which will be very useful for academicians, researchers, and students to upgrade your knowledge and also to understand the basic concepts. So I request all of you to visit our website and download this information, which will be useful for you. As I told you, I'm going to share with you few glimpses of our activities only in the year of 2021. We began our activities with our collaboration with Nipro Renal Care in organizing a webinar on living well with kidney disease to commemorate the World Kidney Day. During this webinar, the nutritional problems and dietary management of CKD patients and the challenges and solutions of CKD, the information has been shared on these 2 topics by eminent experts. And this was followed by our commemoration of World Health Day. And the program for World Health Day has been planned keeping in mind the COVID-19 situation and the problems faced by the patients of COVID-19 who have recovered from the infection. So the real life experiential sharing has happened from 2 of our very active LEC members, Mrs. Anuradha Mitra and Mrs. Madhvi Sathe. And the experience as a dietitian attending COVID-19 patients in the hospital was shared by eminent dietitian Dr. Eileen Candy. And in addition to that, the psychological problems of COVID-19 patients and nutritional issues and their management have been addressed by Dr. Rajesh Sagar, eminent psychologist, and also Dr. Anagha Palekar. And as I told you, we have been conducting webinar series to encourage research attitude in the younger generation and also to strengthen research skills in the researchers and students and academia. So as part of that, we have organized one webinar series on qualitative research in public health nutrition, during which sampling techniques, data collection, assessment and reporting of qualitative data. These are the topics that were addressed, and eminent experts who were actually working in qualitative research have conducted sessions on each of these topics, and this was very highly appreciated. There are two occasions which were definitely celebrated by all the nutrition departments of academic institutions as well as the nutrition associations. These are World Breastfeeding Week in August and the National Nutrition Month in September. And NSI Mumbai chapter is very active in collaborating with various organizations, which includes academic organizations as well as non-governmental and government organizations. As part of that, we have conducted 3 different programs during the World Breastfeeding Week. It was a fully packed schedule for us. And the first program we have conducted in collaboration with College of Home Science, Nirmala Niketan, the Department of Foods, Nutrition and Dietetics. And this program has contributed to the knowledge sharing with the students and youngsters on breastfeeding, the benefits. Whereas the other 2 programs were in collaboration with Niramaya Health Foundation and Nourish 1000 Days. These 2 programs were mainly for skill building, and the programs were catering to the ICDS workers, Anganwadi workers, and the beneficiaries of ICDS programs. So the participants of these programs were from various rural areas of Maharashtra and also from Mumbai, who attended this program online and learned the skills of breastfeeding and addressing the issues of breastfeeding of lactating women they were benefited from the expertise of lactation management experts. This was followed by our celebration of National Nutrition Month. And this month was also very successful month for us as far as our programs were concerned. And we have collaborated with Dr. BMN College of Home Science for conducting the first webinar of National Nutrition Month on the 4th of September. And these programs were supported by Kellogg's Nutrition. And the first webinar was on holistic nutrition for healthy aging, translating science to practice. As you can see, eminent experts, including Dr. Kamala Krishnaswamy and international eminent experts, Dr. Tatiana Rox and others, have addressed various issues and of current importance related to the theme. And the second webinar during this National Nutrition Month was in collaboration with Srimati Maniben Nanavati Women's College, and that was on applications of nutritional metabolomics in public health nutrition. And even these various important topics were addressed by eminent experts from National Institute of Nutrition, none other than the former director of National Nutrition of Nutrition, Dr. Sesikaran, and Dr. Lakshmaya, scientist at NIN, and also Dr. Sucharita from famous St. John's Medical College, Bengaluru. Later, we proceeded to conduct another very successful workshop on techniques of food analysis, and the expertise has been contributed by Dr. R. Ananthan, scientist from NIN, who have showed us the various experiments and the techniques that were performed actually in their labs. This has benefited several students from various colleges across India. And in the same month, we also had another very interesting webinar on food exchange list planning and execution. In the light of recent food composition tables, many dietitians were facing it difficult to integrate that in the diet planning. So several issues were addressed by Mr. Shiv Shankar during this webinar. And in addition to conducting several webinars and training programs, NSI Mumbai chapter has also thought of bringing out certain publications, of course, e-publications. And the first publication in this year of 2021 was a compilation of indigenous nutritious recipes. The idea of compiling these recipes, including beverages, snacks, main course, curries, and desserts from various regions of India, was in response to the invitation from Ministry of Family Welfare, Government of India. And secondly, many of you must be visiting our social media handles. We post, so we share social media posts on every day on various very important nutritional issues and various other topics as well, supporting public health and contributing to public health awareness in the public about health and nutrition. And each of these posts include evidence-based information. I'm very happy to share with you that the posts are developed by nutritionists, not only the eminent nutritionists or experienced nutritionists, but also students, but of course under the guidance and mentorship of our social media team and LEC members. So each post will be including evidence-based information. So we didn't want to just file all these posts, and we have compiled a kind of album with all these posts, and that became our second publication in this year. And both these publications can be viewed and can be utilized by all of you on our website. So you must have already understood that we are very active on social media. Thanks to our social media team once again. We have been thanking them on each platform. We cannot but help it. And we are definitely trending on Facebook, YouTube, and Insta. We have followers within as well as outside India. And I request all of you to visit our social media handles and get benefited. Not only that, I also request each one of you to share the information that we are sharing on our social media handles with all your contacts, so that our objective is fulfilled, that is improving awareness of nutrition and health. Today, the National Science Day. We are here, all of us together, to celebrate the National Science Day. And the National Science Day is observed to celebrate the remarkable discovery of Sir C.V. Raman for the Raman effect, which was discovered in the year 1928. For this remarkable discovery, Sir Raman received the Nobel Prize in 1930, the first Nobel Prize in India in the field of science. Thus, Sir Raman has made all the Indians proud for generations. In the year 1986, the National Council for Science and Technology Communication requested the Government of India to designate February 28th as National Science Day. The occasion has been celebrated in various academic and research organizations throughout India. The theme of this year's National Science Day is Integrated Approach in Science and Technology for a Sustainable Future. Yes, integration of science and technology is very essential for sustainable future in every field, and including health sciences. And since nutrition also is a part of health sciences, the science of nutrition also requires to integrate science and technology. After serious brainstorming, the chapter members have decided, the LEC members have decided to deliberate on a special topic, which is most essential for food product development and thereby entrepreneurship in the area of nutrition, that is sensory evaluation. Today, we have an eminent expert with us from CFTRI, Dr. M.R. Asha. At this juncture, I now invite Mrs. Anuradha Shekhar, Secretary, NSA Mumbai chapter, to introduce the speaker and take over the session. I also invite Dr. Veena Ayati as a rapporteur of the session, along with Mrs. Anuradha Shekhar.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that enlightening NSI activities that you have thrown light on today for all the youngsters who have joined in NSI. I'm so very appreciative of all of you, all the participants who have joined. And I would like to take blessings of Dr. Shashikaran, whom I can see on the audience, and Dr. Kamla Krishna Menon. Krishna Kumari Menon. Thank you for joining us, madams and sir. We take your blessings and we start this lovely session on sensory evaluation. Sensory evaluation plays an important role in new product development, as we all know, as nutritionists. Sensory studies are being expanded with contributions from physiology, psychology, dentistry, neurosciences, and food sciences. All these experts seek answers to catastrophic, complicated procedures created by the oral process. Sensory science can be split into sensation and perception to provide an insight to physiological and psychological approaches, psychophysical laws to interpret the missing link between the stimulus and perception, sensory market success and consumer behavior to highlight the necessity of sensory testing for the industry and consumer, sensory evaluation methods, and recent developments in the field. So we have here Dr. M.R. Asha, Principal Technical Officer, Department of Traditional Food and Sensory Sciences, CSIR, CFTRI, Mysuru, Karnataka. Thank you very much, ma'am, for being here on this platform and sharing whatever you feel are the recent advances in sensory evaluation. We are really looking forward to that. To just briefly introduce, though I know she must be having many, many more laurels to her credit, her fields of special interest are exploratory research on natural means of enhancing sensory perception and freshness of foods. She's very, 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 it's a dear topic for her because she just now said that she loves the word called prana in foods. So food acoustics is something which I have never heard of. Consumer psychology, sensory marketing, emotional intelligence, behavioral sciences, neuroplasticity, nutrition, and cognition. She worked in Human Resource Development Department from 2015 to 18 as a coordinating and assisting in academic activities related to MSc Food Technology course. She's presently working in Traditional Food and Sensory Sciences Department, focusing on quality assessment of foods using various sensory analysis techniques and heading an externally funded project on development of sensory lexicon. So I would also like to say that she has contributed many books, as well as she has been a keynote addressee in many of the conferences. She is much sought after speaker at various academic and professional events, and her awards include: she is a gold medalist for securing first rank in MSc Food Science, topper in MSc for the whole university in science faculty, fourth rank at national level diploma in mental health, Mysuru, and she has done this from K. Vempu University. And so the lists are on, and other interests include yoga practitioner. She's an author of two books, which is Create Your Life Consciously and Life is Beautiful. That itself shows how mentally sound she is, and she's going to pass on today her information that she has gathered all throughout the years in this world of sensory evaluation. So to you, madam, I would request you to start your lecture.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Anuradha, and thank you, Dr. Subhadra Mandalika. I'll just start my presentation now. Good afternoon, everybody. I thank Team NSI and also all the participants for your time, especially on a Sunday, because I value time and time is life. Thank you once again. So the topic of today's webinar is recent trends in sensory evaluation, integration of science and technology. To put it very simply, to understand very easily, science is a body of knowledge. Science is knowledge, and technology is application of this science. Whatever knowledge we have gathered, how we can use this as a technology, applying in everyday life so that our lives become easier, smoother. Okay, as you can see in this slide, sensory science is all about making sense of the world around us and the world within us. It is connecting both of them. This actually starts even from the moment or the time when we are in our mother's wombs. So our knowledge or sensations or our touch with sensory analysis begins even when we are in our mother's wombs. Then once we come out, then making sense of the world around us and within is very important, because that is how we connect intelligently with everything that is around us, with our environment. As you can see here, the very pictures, I've tried as much as possible to include pictures and very few words so that it's very interesting, not boring for the participants, because using a lot of sentences, many people may not be very interested in that. So instead, this I have tried to make as visually attractive and appealing, sensorily appealing as possible. So these are just pictures of this fruit, orange. So the moment we look at it, we conjure up almost the taste, color, and also the odor or olfactory senses also get activated just by looking at the picture, because we have already tasted, we have this impression stored in our brains. And now just looking at this freshly brewed coffee, I'm very sure it makes many people, their mouth may be watering, and especially the freshly brewed coffee. And coming to this masala dosa, all Indians would be very famous, very familiar with this famous masala dosa. The texture, the aroma, and also the taste, the whole thing, it's a great sensory experience. So I would say the whole world is a sensory lab. Every day, the moment we wake up, we start receiving these sensory cues from all around us. So it's up to us how we make use of it, how we make sense of the world, and how we respond to these sensory cues. So I've tried to include one small experience for you, an auditory experience for you here. So this one is for the sense of sound or auditory cue. Actually, when we wake up in the morning, many of us may not pay attention. Those who are fortunate enough to have some birds around them, we may not pay conscious attention to these beautiful birds chirping every morning. This is the best alarm we could find, not a regular alarm, the clock. So going to the next one. Now you can see these pictures very well, again depicting various experiences, sensory experiences. So these children, you can see the expressions on their faces, because there have been many products meant for children. Since children cannot articulate their responses or feedback, we usually depend on mothers for children's products. And also there have been certain facial scales which will represent various expressions, facial expressions, depicting several emotions or responses of the children. So you can see this little one puckering the nose, because that particular, maybe he or she has just tasted something very sour. Immediate reaction is puckering the face and nose. And this is another kid playing happily around with some clay, colored clay, and look at the delight on her face. She's so delightfully exhilarated, having various sensory experiences. This is how, since childhood, we start exploring and having various sensory experiences, and we store away all these experiences in this memory database. And this one is for sniffing or smelling. This child is very happy smelling this mango. I would like to add few things here. We have several words or terminologies. These are kids, they cannot articulate what they're experiencing. But however, for adults, we have beautiful sensory vocabulary, which are very specific, and they denote something specific, some specific sensory experience that we are having. For example, as you can see, as you are familiar, when you look at the faces of people, there are different kinds of smiles. It's something like smiling, smirking, grinning, grimacing, and you have giggling and guffawing. See, these are all different kinds of smiles. Smiling, grinning, grimacing, and then guffawing, and also giggling. See, these are all different kinds of smiles. So they represent different states of mind also, how we experience the world. Okay, next. And there is one picture, last picture here. You can see this is for the sense of touch. That is how since childhood, as kids, we learn what happens when you touch something very sharp, like a prickly needle, or when you touch something hot, when you touch something cold, soft, anything. So these are various sensory modalities or different avenues from which children, or as kids, we store or experience sensory cues from our atmosphere, our environment. Now, just looking at this picture, you can almost conjure up, if you have ever touched such a leaf earlier, it is a dew-kissed leaf. You can see this is actually grass, dew-kissed grass. I took this picture recently at our campus. So there is fine hair on the surface of this grass. The moment you touch it, it's such a beautiful experience. You connect with Mother Nature. You connect with prana of this plant or grass. And also these droplets of dew, which is collected in the morning, early morning, that gives you a sensation of coolness. So altogether, this is a beautiful experience touching this grass. Now coming to the history of sensory analysis, early traders grading wine, coffee, butter, fish, etc., and they were able to fix the price of the commodity. This is how it started. Actually, sensory science could be dated back. It has originated ever since there have been human beings. So they have been having various sensory experiences. Only thing is they may not have been consciously aware of it. So early traders, when they had this barter method of exchange, barter exchange, they used to grade different commodities that they produced, they grew or produced using this basic sensory analysis. Then in 1600s, René Descartes, he conducted some animal experiments. There is some documentation about this. In 1800s, we have registers for recording sensations such as pain in certain laboratories where animal experiments were being carried out. Then in early 1900s, professional tasters in beverage industry, there were time intensity studies where the response of people is measured in terms of with respect to time as a function. So as the response continues, it is recorded with respect to time. That is time intensity study. Then we also had some sensory panels, beginning of sensory panel, systematic training. Then use of the word organoleptic denoting objective measurement of sensory attributes. So this was in 1900s. Then later on in the second part of the century, 1936, 40, 50, several sensory testing methods, mainly descriptive analysis, developed. Then in early 1970s, development of descriptive analysis methods were continued. We had A.D. Little's flavor profile method. This was the first one to develop for various modalities, under various modalities. Flavor profile was the first one to be developed. Then we have Dragon's quantitative descriptive analysis method. Two more names which are associated with this quantitative descriptive analysis, or QDA, commonly known as QDA, is Stone and Seidel. So these two are the names commonly associated. Early 1990s, we had preference mapping techniques to relate consumer preference to descriptive attributes. We'll come to that later on, because descriptive attributes usually it is carried out, descriptive analysis is usually carried out by trained panelists. And relating that to consumer response who are untrained, that was the main issue at that time. Then early to 2010s, we had sorting techniques. Then by 2022, we have temporal tests. So coming to the scientific definition, so far we have just had some sensory experiences. I exposed you to certain experiences, or rather I reminded you of sensory experiences we have already had. Now coming to the standard definition, scientific definition, sensory evaluation is a scientific discipline to evoke, measure, analyze, and interpret responses to products perceived. And please remember and note that sensory analysis or sensory evaluation is not confined to food products alone. Sensory analysis applies to all kinds of consumer products and appliances. So it is the scientific discipline to evoke, measure, analyze, and interpret responses to products perceived through the 5 senses, sensory organs: the sense of sight with eyes, the sense of smell with the nose or olfactory epithelium, then sense of touch using our fingers, skin basically, and also the sense of touch or tactile receptors are also there inside the mouth, inside the oral cavity. Then taste using our tongue, then hearing using our ears, and also there are other receptors. When we bite into foods, it's not just we hear the sound with our ears, we also sense the vibrations with the receptors inside the mouth for hearing. Now this is just another visual treat I just created for you. Visual treat. When you look at the picture of these fruits, it immediately reminds you of the abundance and also the colorful treat and feast Mother Nature gives us so generously. And there's another picture here giving you the pictures of the spices, one of the best treats for the olfactory epithelium, beautiful spices such as clove, cinnamon, cardamom, we have ginger, a lot of other spices, vanilla, and many things, which really makes our life very flavorful. And there's another picture here, the cake with a piece cut from the cake. So this is for denoting the delights of texture, the spectrum of texture we are treated to in our regular daily routine. Coming to this cognition. So most people have some idea or the other about cognition. It relates to mainly, it has a lot of other functions. I'm confining myself only to those functions which are relevant here for sensory evaluation. So as I mentioned earlier, we have sensory cues all around us. We are actually simultaneously bombarded by a lot of sensory cues from the environment all around us. Only thing is, our brain is designed in such a way, we should be grateful to the designer, our creator, we can direct our attention to only the selected ones, which are of importance to us for survival, basically, and other functions which are required for our regular day-to-day functions. So sensory cues are always present everywhere. As I mentioned, this whole world is a sensory laboratory. So when we come to this perceiving, this is perceiving. So when we pay attention to the particular sensory cue that we are receiving, or we are directing our attention to a particular sensory cue, that is directing the attention. And perceiving also has the meaning of making sense of the sensory cue that you are receiving, and also understanding it, being aware of it. That is perceiving. Then judging. Okay, is this good or bad? Whether it is very hot or cold. So these are judging. You are comparing whatever you are receiving, the sensory cue from the outside atmosphere. Then evaluating. Should I continue with this? Should I go on, or should I stop this? Should I remove myself from this atmosphere? You are evaluating, again, based on the consequences, and also the comparing it to previous experiences. So that is evaluating. Then learning. Suppose you are exposed to something very new. You have not had that sensory experience earlier. So you will immediately label this with something and put it away in the database, in the memory. So next time when we receive something similar to this or the same cue, we will remember this. This is also called sensory recall. So this is about the basic cognition relevant to sensory analysis. Okay, so as Madam Dr. Anuradha mentioned earlier, sensory science is actually a multidisciplinary area where we have interactions and inputs from physics, physiology, psychology, neuroscience, statistics, food science, nutrition, information science of late, and also dentistry and medicine, as Madam rightly mentioned. Physics, generally, we talk about physical stimuli to which we have physiological and psychological response. So physics come into that. And physiology, whatever our body or organs that we have, sense organs, all those processes, receiving the sensory cue and then responding, then conducting that sensory cue as a nervous signal, electrical impulse to the brain, all those physiology. Then psychology, as I mentioned earlier, sensory science actually is an offshoot of psychophysics, where psychological and physiological responses are studied for physical stimuli. Then neuroscience, definitely brain and nervous system is involved. Then statistics. Statistics is an important part of sensory science, because when we conduct tests, whether it's from a trained sensory panel or from a consumer untrained consumer panel, we have a lot of data, an ocean of data. So to make sense of that and to draw meaningful conclusions from the study, we need statistics. A lot of statistical softwares are also available nowadays, so that the job of the sensory analyst or sensory scientist is made easier. And food science naturally is very much involved. When we prepare food, the science of food, the ingredients, processing, the way food is cooked, stored, food science is also involved. Then nutrition is definitely a part of this sensory science, because when we have good nutrition, all our nervous system, brain, everything, and the whole body will work perfectly well. So nutrition is an important part. Then information science of late, especially where artificial intelligence is concerned. I'll be touching upon that briefly in the later slides. So that is also interacting nowadays, giving its contribution to sensory science. Okay, now we come to very briefly, I'll discuss about this memory encoding. When you receive any sensory information, how do you store it here in the brain? Sensory information is converted to a construct stored in the brain that can be recalled later. So this is how we store sensory information. There are 4 primary types of encoding. One is visual, next is acoustic, next is elaborative, the last one is semantic. Visual type of encoding is with the visual signals, what we receive, sensory cues, so that is encoded. Then acoustic, it's related to sound, what we hear with our ears. Then third one is elaborative. Whenever new sensory information comes in, we generally compare it to what is already stored here. That is elaborative method of encoding. The last one is semantic. Semantic is something related to language or use of words. So each sensory experience is usually coded with semantic or words. We have associative words or certain words are tagged with each sensory experience. This is very important when we are training the panelists. I'll come to that later on. Then there is another word that people have to be familiar with when we talk about sensory science and neuroscience. This is neuroplasticity. This is very important because this is the ability of the brain to change through growth and reorganization, where new neural pathways can occur. This is important because when you expose yourselves or the kids, whatever it is, to enriching diverse sensory experiences, the child or the adult will have very good new neural pathways. The new connections can form when you are exposed to new experiences. So this is important. Now coming to this, okay. Perception is identification, organization, and interpretation of sensory information. This is contextual, based on your immediate environment and also to some extent what is already stored in our brain. Then encoding happens with chemicals which are there in the brain related to brain chemistry, neurotransmitters, and then electrical impulses which pass between these neurons, then neural pathways because of neurons, and then flow of information within the brain, then novel events and experiences, as I just mentioned. New information is stored in the memory, and brain is it's beautifully designed, equipped to rewire. It doesn't mean that brain will always remain static, or once you are exposed to certain set of experiences, that is all there is to it. No. The more you expose yourselves to new sensory experiences, the more brain rewires. Then stimuli are perceived by the senses. They travel to the thalamus of the human brain. Then it is synthesized into one experience. As I mentioned earlier, we have different avenues through which we receive sensory cues or information. We receive through eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and also touch. So all these separate components of the experience are synthesized into one piece or one experience. We tag it with some semantic or word, then store it in the brain. So this is how it is done. Then it is hippocampus which analyzes this experience and decides whether it is worth committing to long-term memory. Or is it, if it is not worth, maybe we may forget quite often few things which we don't feel very important. Then there is something called attentional capture, that is paying attention to a piece of information. As I mentioned earlier, we are continuously bombarded by lots of sensory cues, but we direct our attention to only certain pieces of information. This will help us reduce the sensory overload. Otherwise, we would be too overwhelmed by all the sensory cues that we receive at the same time. So attentional capture directs attention to only certain pieces of sensory information. Okay, now we come to different sensory properties. When we take any food or any product, there are generally four or five categories under which the sensory properties can be categorized. One is color and appearance. So with our eyes, what we see is what we perceive. So color, that's the first thing that occurs to anybody when you look at anything, whether it's a flower or a food or anything. What immediately strikes you, even before you smell or touch, what immediately strikes you is how does it look? What color is it? So color and appearance form the primary category under which sensory properties of food or any material is classified. We have two important things here. One is hue, name of the color as we recognize, like pink or red or green or blue or whatever. Then appearance. Under appearance, we have certain properties like optical properties. How does this particular sample look like? Is it transparent? Is it opaque? Is it shiny? Is it glossy? Then physical form refers to the actual form of the sample, whether it is liquid or solid, is it free flowing? So these are all the physical form categories. Next is presentation mode. This plays a very important role in sensory science because how you present the product will definitely influence how the panelist or the consumer perceives it. So presentation mode, for example, if you want to highlight the color of your product, we generally present those samples in attractive, transparent containers, as you can see in these pictures. So presentation mode is very important. Coming to texture, what you have here is a set of words. These are called sensory attributes. You have cellular, crisp, juicy, soft, hard, chewy, dry, smooth, soggy. There are hundreds of such words which specifically describe textural properties of foods or materials. You can also add to improve your expression, or if you want to emphasize on what is your USP of your product, you can say delightfully crispy or judiciously juicy, delightfully crispy, or exactly just right chewy. Because chewiness is a property of this food as we experience. In certain foods, when chewiness is not present, we miss that. For example, in case of certain chocolates, this chewiness is very much required. It's a desirable property. Whereas in certain products like vegetable preparations, when the vegetable is it's not tender, suppose it's quite matured, if it has a lot of fibers, then chewiness in that context will not be very desirable. So you can say delightfully crisp or just right juicy or whatever. So these are some of the words or descriptors that we use to specifically describe sensory textures of foods. Now coming to aroma or flavor. I would like to clarify a few things here. For the common man, aroma and flavor, they generally use it interchangeably. Whereas in sensory parlance, we have three words: odor, aroma, and flavor. It's easy to remember these things in the same sequence because odor has only one component, what you smell with your nose. Aroma has two components. It has odor as well as taste. To some extent, this taste component also. Flavor has three components. One is odor, second one is taste, third one is mouthfeel. Mouthfeel is certain property of certain foods such as cooling, pungent, hot, or even irritating, astringent. These are all certain descriptors which describe the mouthfeel properties when we eat certain foods. And I would like to add one more thing here. When we talk about aroma perception, there are two words which we can remember. One is orthonasal aroma perception. The other one is retronasal aroma perception. Orthonasal is when you put something in front of your nose and just sniff it using only your nostrils or nose. You're taking the air in. And in case of retronasal aroma perception, you are taking the food inside your mouth, you are chewing it. As you are chewing, certain volatiles are released. Those volatiles are felt at the back of the throat. There are certain receptors there which can receive this sensory cue or information. So retro means back. So back of the throat, you perceive certain sensations, flavor sensations. Why this is important, you need to know about this is, there are certain undesirable taints or flavor components which you will not perceive by just sniffing that, because instinctively many a time we do that, even consumers do that. If you want to check whether the quality of the food is fine, whether it has undergone any spoilage, immediately what they do is they want to sniff or smell this. So sometimes with just orthonasal perception, certain flavor components or aroma components may not be perceptible. Only when we take it inside and start chewing and those volatiles are removed, we feel it from the back of our throat. That is retronasal aroma perception. And there are certain words I would like to introduce here. These are specific ways of tasting the samples. This is associated with sensory analysis once again. Why I'm talking about that with relevance to aroma is there's a reason. I would like to mention three things. These are very specific ways of tasting the sample. One is sipping. Everybody knows. So you just take small quantities of the liquid, especially. You just sip that. This is important, especially in case of coffee and tea. Sipping is one thing. Next is drinking. Okay, you just take some coffee, put it inside your mouth. Sipping will allow you to take small bite size or small quantity of the sample and you go on taking it incrementally. Whereas drinking indicates more quantity of the sample being introduced into your mouth. There is one third word. This is called slurping. This is a particular way of holding the sample, especially coffee, tea, or even decoction of that, black coffee, black tea, and also certain soups. These are slurped. There are certain spoons meant only for this. You take the sample in the spoon and we make noise. We just taste it from the, we take the sample from the spoon using our tongue and lips, making noise. This slurping is very important because this allows you to perceive certain odors which you would miss if you just drink or sip the sample. And there is also one more thing, three more words I would like to introduce here. We are all very familiar with the word smelling. Everybody talks about smelling. There's a gradation. These are different ways of testing the sample. One is smelling, one is sniffing, the other one is snorting. When you smell, the amount of air containing the odorants in the volatile form, the amount of air that enters your olfactory epithelium is a little small. You are just smelling. When you sniff, the action is deliberate, it is conscious and forceful intake of more of the volatiles, more of the air where the volatiles are present. Snorting is you keep the sample very close to your nose. Usually smelling and sniffing are carried out in the sensory analysis labs. I just wanted to introduce you to these words so that you will know the difference in the way a sample is taken in. Snorting is usually associated with these drugs. People who are into drugs, when they take these drugs, snorting they do. So that's one way of introducing the sample to your body. Now this is taste. Okay, everybody is familiar with all these samples that I have just put here. We have generally 5 tastes are recognized, which humans can recognize. Generally, they are categorized as 5 groups. One is sweet, then we have salty, then sour, bitter, and umami. Umami is, some people feel this is actually a mouth feel, but it is officially recognized as the 5th taste. It was introduced little later. The most basics are sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. Now coming to sensory panel. Sensory analysis, we have just had some idea now how it is carried out. Now who will do this testing, sensory testing? It is the sensory panel. Usually there are certain standard tests. Using these standard tests, the panelists are screened initially, then after screening, they are selected. Then we have further training the panelists. So there are 3 kinds of panel groups. One is trained panel, then semi-trained panel, and consumer. So trained panelists go through a very rigorous screening, selection, and training process. Semi-trained and trained panelists are used for certain tests, which are highly systematic, very sensitive. Semi-trained panel, they're not as trained as the previous one, but they can do certain tests. Tests are such as ranking, and such tests can be given to the semi-trained panelists. And actually, there is no very strict guidelines nowadays, especially for semi-trained people, semi-trained panelists, and many of them can be used for certain more number of tests. And the more recent tests developed recently, they focus mostly on consumers. Each panel has its own merits, because highly trained panelists, their availability and their expertise could be sometimes very expensive. So in that case, many companies would like to have their own in-house semi-trained panelists, and consumers, of course, are always available. And there are 2 basic abilities expected in panelists. The 2 Ds I have just mentioned here. The 2 Ds are ability to discriminate, the ability to describe. These 2 are the important basic qualities expected in panelists. Ability to discriminate is when you are given several samples, if they are same or different, whether there is any small subtle difference among the samples. So this is the ability to discriminate. Then ability to describe is also an important. This is where your semantic skills, verbal skills, and semantic memory comes into play. Because if you are experiencing something, see, some people may be good with discrimination, but if they are unable to adequately express what they are experiencing at the moment, their verbal skills and development of lexicon, will come into that later. These are very important qualities, discriminating and describing. Whatever they are experiencing, they need to express it, communicate it in tangible and clear ways with specific words. This is important. Now, coming to the basic requirements, who can become a good panelist? Everybody will have a question. This is a very frequently asked question. Who can become a good panelist? Somebody, whoever wants to become good panelists, basically they need to have these qualities. One is normal health. They should not be having anosmia or ageusia. This is very important because these are the 2 terms which are being discussed quite often these days with the COVID pandemic times. In the COVID pandemic times, anosmia and ageusia are very frequently being discussed, because this has been one of the key features for diagnosing, or one of the key features, key symptoms of COVID-19 infection. Anosmia means loss of sense of smell. Sorry, there is a spelling mistake. It is anosmia, anosmia. Then ageusia is loss of sense of taste. And there are different degrees here. Some people may be hyposmic or hypogeusics. In the sense, their sensitivity is less compared to common or the population. And in case of, and there's also a possibility of hyperosmics and hyperageusics, who are highly sensitive to odors and taste. These people are also there. But we make sure people who want to be in the panel, to be included in the panel, they have normal sensitivity without any of these abnormalities. Then sensitivity is, they can say it's somewhat a subjective quality. Some people may be highly sensitive, some may be less sensitive. Anyway, panel training will take care of that, and it's the duty of the panel leader to take care of these things. See, there's a wide variation spectrum of sensitivity in people. What seems very inspiring to somebody may be very insipid to somebody else. What is very exciting for somebody may be very exhausting for the other person. And somebody may find some cue or something very stimulating, whereas the other person may find it very stifling. And there may be something one finds very constructive, the other may find it constricting. So there's a lot of variability, diversity in people. So when we select people to become panelists, to include in the panel, we have to take care of all these things. Then ability to concentrate. This is very important, because when you are given a sample, when you are being taught about this sample, you need to have the ability to concentrate, pay attention to what is given to you. Ability to concentrate. Otherwise, if your attention is going, it's wandering here and there, then you won't be able to be a good panelist. Then ability to communicate, as I mentioned earlier, it is related to semantic or verbal skills. Ability to communicate. Let me also add here, ability to communicate is not restricted to verbal communication. We also have various body language signals, which will be very communicative if the other person is quite receptive to that. Verbal communication is only part of the total communication. Then interest and motivation. This is also an important quality we look for in panelists, because if you are not interested, out of some pressure or force, if you are taking part in the evaluation, definitely your results will be affected by this. Whatever we do willingly, we enjoy that. When we are interested in doing it, whatever we do willingly, we enjoy that. When we do something unwillingly, we suffer that. So it's better to have people with interest and motivation in the panel. Then unprejudiced. This is also important. When people have certain prejudices, likes and dislikes, even before they become panelists, it's in all likelihood, unconsciously, it may be carried over to the evaluation that they do. So it's better to have an open mind, a conscious open mind, not to allow your likes and dislikes or prejudices about any particular food into this process of sensory analysis. This willingness to participate, I already mentioned. When people come willingly, their performance will be Good. Then availability. This is also important, physical availability. As I mentioned earlier, most of these food organizations, they have in-house panelists. Some of them may recruit panelists from outside institutions or outsource them. So availability of panelists when the sample is prepared fresh. There are certain conditions because there are certain food preparations which need to be evaluated when the food is fresh. There are certain conditions where the food is under shelf life studies, then it is already stored. Even then, as soon as the stored packet, whatever we receive during withdrawals of shelf life studies, when the packet is cut open, it is important for all the panelists to be present because they may get important clues about the quality of the product that is stored under various conditions, in containers of various packaging materials. The headspace, when we cut open the packet and immediately sniff the headspace, that may give you some clue about the quality of the product. So availability of panelists is of utmost importance too. This is just a picture of a sensory testing facility where sensory booths for product evaluation are shown here. This picture shows several booths. There are certain international norms for constructing these sensory booths regarding temperature, RH, and also with least distraction, with minimum or no distraction. And there are all guidelines available, ASTM guidelines available. And you can see that each booth is separated from the other. And actually, this is not shown in the picture. Ideally, the sensory booth room should have two separate doors. One for the incoming panelists to entrance. Should be a separate exit door for the panelists who have completed the evaluation and who are going out. This is important because the samples that we receive for sensory analysis vary in quality. Some may be very pleasant, some may not be so pleasant. So invariably, many a time unconsciously, the impression about the product may still be retained on the face of the panelist just as they are finishing the evaluation and they are exiting that room. So if there is a same door, if the incoming panelist sees the residual expression, facial expression on, the facial expression of the panelist who is going out, who has just finished the evaluation, suppose the sample was not good, then it speaks volumes and so much information without speaking a word will be exchanged. Information flow will be there between the incoming panelist and the outgoing panelist. So it's better to have two separate doors for this. And the second picture here shows a close-up of this each booth, how it will be. As you can see here, there will be trays. There are all guidelines for how to arrange the sample, the containers, cutlery that you use, they should all be odor-free and preferably made of glass or ceramic, porcelain. The point is the container in which you serve the product should not impart its own odor to the product. This is important. So as much as possible, it should be kept odor-free. Then a glass of water is generally given. This is for cleansing the palate in between samples. If the sample is quite intense, for example, spice powders, in such a case, it's important to give, in addition to water, it's important to serve something we call palate cleanser, palate cleansing agent. Usually these are bland biscuits. This will help, which are starchy in nature. This will help flush the mouth of the residual odor or taste or whatever food product in the mouth of the panelist. There is also facility here to rinse the mouth. Between samples, we instruct the panelists to rinse their mouth each time before they go to the new sample. So this is just about the odor testing facility. This is a laboratory or carefully controlled setup for sensory analysis. Now we'll just see how the other kind of sensory testing lab can be. So this is just a break for you. As I mentioned earlier, the previous picture or previous slide was on carefully controlled laboratory condition where sensory analysis takes place. This is a natural sensory analysis lab where you have lot of sometimes pleasant, sometimes not so pleasant distractions. This is just a sensory break for you. Now we move on to testing methods, different testing methods. We have analytical tests. There are two main categories, analytical tests and affective tests. Under analytical tests, we have sensitivity tests, discriminative tests, and descriptive analysis. These are the major ones I'm covering. Usually, analytical tests are product-oriented. They're usually carried out by a trained panel under laboratory testing conditions. I repeat, analytical tests are product-oriented, conducted by trained panel under laboratory conditions. Whereas affective tests are response-oriented. They are usually conducted under field conditions with untrained panelists or common people, consumers. So that's the main differentiation. I'll just touch upon very briefly because I just saw the time. We have sensitivity tests. This is very important. This will measure the sensitivity of people, how sensitive they are. Under this, the important one is threshold test. We have threshold tests for various parameters like taste, odor, or any of these sensory cues. I'll give you a very small example because it's easy to understand. Under sensitivity tests, if I describe this threshold test for sweetness, for example, this is very commonly conducted to measure the sensitivity of people or panelists who are aspirants to become panelists before inducting them. This will give us a very good idea about the sensitivity of that person. So usually samples are prepared according to certain guidelines, and samples are arranged in the increasing order of intensity. This is very important. We should not mix up the samples. It is always served in a particular sequence, starting from lowest intensity to highest intensity. So we ask people to taste each sample one by one and cleansing their mouth, rinsing their mouth with water, because these are very low intensity samples. So in this series of samples, at some point where they'll be able to definitely say, yes, this is sweetness, for example, that will be the identification threshold or threshold for sweetness for that person. So we have a lot of procedures for correlating these data, compiling their data, and a lot of procedures are there. I just gave you one example. And we have discriminative tests where panelists are asked to find whether two samples are same or different. We have pair test, triangle test, duo-trio test under this category. So this will test the discriminative ability of the panelist, whether they are able to sense small differences. We test this. Then we have descriptive analysis such as free choice profiling, flash profiling. This is rapid and discriminative. Then projective mapping, napping. There are so many other tests under descriptive analysis. Profiling is usually, I mentioned that earlier, QDA, quantitative descriptive analysis, is a very extensively used test. Under affective tests, we have hedonic, preference, or accept or reject. These are very simple ones. We make sure the score sheet or the scorecard we use for these tests are very simple. We don't ask too many questions because this is meant for carrying out under field conditions involving untrained or common people. Now, this is just a picture of a flavor wheel. This is called a flavor wheel. You can see this inner ring. These are very basic ones. I don't know how others can see because the font is very small here. So you can just read sweet, floral, fruity, and various main categories of flavor notes. The second ring is little more descriptive. As you can see, for floral category, you have some subcategories. And for the sweet, you have some more subcategories. The outer ring is much more specific. So this is how we can go on expanding. So this is a very systematic collection of sensory descriptors. This lexicon development is an important step for product development and characterization. Now coming to instrumental measurements, this I've just shown very few instruments here. One is electronic nose. This makes use of metal oxide sensors. This is designed to mimic the function of human nose. This is very important. It has applications where human panelists cannot participate, such as detection or when we are dealing with hazardous gases or when we have lot of samples, too many samples. This will be very useful because when we are talking about human panelists, the factor of sensory fatigue comes in. So human panelists can only handle certain number of samples for each session. And this is texture analyzer, texture measuring system. So this will measure the texture of foods. This is an instrumental method. Next, we have electronic tongue. This also uses electrodes. So this takes samples in the form of liquids. This is supposed to, it cannot actually 100% imitate everything that a human tongue can do, but they have their own applications. A very commonly, I come across this question very commonly. Can instruments alone do all the sensory analysis? Do we really need human sensory panelists? Definitely, yes. Human sensory panelists are definitely required. The main difference between the two is each one has its own merits and limitations. That is there. But the best approach is to make the best of both the worlds. This is where wisdom lies. There are few things instruments can do. Humans have their own built-in limitations. Our sense organs have certain limitations. Whereas instruments can go much further because they can even detect very low quantities of certain materials, whereas human cannot do, because below this detection threshold, if anything is present, humans cannot detect that its presence. So what I would say is best thing is to combine both the approaches depending on the situation. Humans give integrated responses. Instruments give differential responses. This is the main difference between them. And this is the picture of GC olfactometry. GC, everybody knows, gas chromatography, where samples are injected and the components, there is a carrier gas and there is a certain program. It is programmed the analysis is programmed at certain temperatures. The column will be there. So the mixture or whatever you inject here will be fragmented or divided into its components, and you get an output here as different peaks, GC profilogram. You get different peaks at each retention time. Whenever certain particular compound is released at certain retention time, this can be smelled from the exit port. There's a small tubing here. You can see the tubing. This can be smelled or sniffed by panelists, and they can write down whatever they smell at certain retention times. So this is very useful in analysis of flavors, understanding flavors. So we come to this product development. Why sensory analysis? It has its own major role in these 4 domains, and some more are there. I'm just focusing on these. Product development, whether it is ingredient substitution or process variation or optimization, then sensory drivers, then competitor product testing. Suppose you have your product and there is a competitor in the market who has better sales. Then you would like to know what is it different in the competitor's product that is not present in your product. You can match that and find out what is lacking in yours. Lacking in the sense what appeals to people. So you can always make that change in your product and try to increase your sales. Then cost reduction, then new concept testing, then target consumer identification. These are certain avenues or areas where sensory analysis is useful. When it comes to marketing, advertising, we have lots of advertisers these days, especially with the active social media rampant in our everyday life, because many people, their day begins with just taking their mobile and checking what is happening. So with the social media and smartphones everywhere, marketing has reached greater heights, different scenario altogether. So when advertising, where advertising is concerned, you can always check whatever they're advertising, they're claiming, whether it's really present there in the food, whether sensory analysis can detect that whatever they are claiming, it is useful. Claim substantiation, it relates to that. Then emotional benefits. See, it is not that we eat food only for filling our tummies. There is a lot of emotional benefits, emotions we associate with food. So it is useful there. Then synergy with brand identity, because we come to expect certain quality of food with certain brands. Whether this quality remains consistent over a period of time from the same brand, sensory analysis can check that. Then coming to quality control or QC or QA, quality assurance, then ingredients, starting from the ingredient, sensory analysis plays a key role in checking the quality. Then auditing through supply chain, taint pickup. This is something very important. I should just put a few words in very quick words. Taint pickup is an important part in sensory analysis, especially where quality of foods is concerned. Taint pickup, taint is actually an alien odor which is not supposed to be present in the product. When the product is very fresh, people have certain concept, ideal product concept. When they find certain alien odor in the product, their expectation is dashed. It is disturbed. Taint pickup can happen either intrinsically or from the environment. Actually, taint is what a food product picks up from the environment, and it is possible because of the degradation in the food itself. Certain undesirable notes may be there that can be definitely detected when they are at very low levels. Human sensory panelists are very useful here. And then sensory specifications. As I mentioned in one of the earlier slides regarding color, for example, or optical properties of foods, we have to have certain products with certain qualities. For example, when we talk about jelly, Jelly has to be glossy. It has to have the typical wobbly structure. So these are sensory specifications we have attached or associated with our ideal product. So this is checked using sensory analysis. Then coming to research on consumer psychology, perception and behavior, then receptivity to novelty, then age-dependent preferences, all these factors will be, data on all these factors can be collected and processed using sensory analysis. Okay. Now, consumer responses, they are affected by so many factors. Major ones I have put here. Starting from emotional, psychological. We have emotions, expectation, and conditioning under this. Then social, we have culture, context, and value of quality. How much we value quality, it depends on our social position. Affordability, it comes under a different thing, economical anyway. Then when we talk about product, appearance, texture, aroma, taste, all these will definitely influence consumer responses. When we talk about two things, one is product intrinsic, the other one is product extrinsic. First one, what I said now, just now, appearance, texture, aroma, taste, these are all product intrinsic qualities. Next one is product extrinsic qualities like brand, packaging, and storage. This will influence consumer response. Then coming to biological, age, gender, and health status. This is easy to understand, self-explanatory. Coming to economical, it is definitely the income which will dictate or influence purchase. Then frequency and family size, how frequently certain product is consumed and what is the family size, all those things are governed. Next is availability of the product, food product or whatever. How distance from your home or where you are easily located to the mall or supermarket or the stores where the product is available. Then transportation mode, whether you have a car, you can afford it, or if you have to walk 1 kilometer just to buy some product, this will definitely influence consumer response. Next is social media, as I mentioned earlier, which is very, it has become such a part and parcel of our life today. Most people begin their day with their mobile phone, social media. So that is how consumers, it has actually given rise to a new level of consumer connectivity between the manufacturers and consumers. Then peer influence definitely influences consumer response. Then reach out. How much, you see, with this technology, it has made such a breakthrough, these smartphones and all this digitalization. Your reach out is almost unlimited nowadays. Now, this is an important part, again, sensory marketing of late, especially in the recent times. Of course, this has been there for the past 2 decades, but nowadays it's gaining a lot of importance. Sensory marketing is the marketing which engages consumer senses. It engages all the senses. And this is the important, second part is the important one, affects their perception, judgment, and behavior. How much you can do this marketing, sensory marketing, so that you influence the consumer's perception, judgment, and behavior. This is important. This definition is given by a professor, Dr. Aradhana Krishna. You have various factors here. I'll just go through that quickly. Brand personality. We have certain ideas in our minds about certain brands. So brands have personality. For example, Hershey's. These chocolates are chocolates. We can always say that. Whether you see, earlier Shakespeare has said a rose is a rose is a rose, call it by any other name. But in this case, a lot of other factors are involved. A chocolate is a chocolate, you may say. Not always. How you present it especially when you want to make the novelty, innovativeness, and certain abstract notions associated with the product and brand. How do you communicate it to people which are not very tangible? It's not very direct, like you can see the color, you can see the appearance. So this novelty or innovativeness, this is packed as brand personality. The names that you give, your USP, how do you advertise your product? When you engage all the senses, suppose it is just a plain wrapper, you open the wrapper and eat that. When you have certain different kinds of wrappers which make a lot of sound when you open it, it gives you a different experience. You feel you are a special person. So all these are involved here. Next, we have odor, perception, and learning. I would say the difference between sensation and perception, it is here anyway. This odor, perception, and learning. Odor is actually one of the most primitive sensory experiences that we have. This is the first one to develop even during gestational period is sense of touch. Next to that, it is this odor. Odor has a lot of importance because this odor is the most primitive sense and it stays with us for a very long time. The memory of odor stays with us for a long time. And certain brands actually develop their signature odors or signature scents, what they call. So when you have certain experiences with certain odors, especially when they're combined with other sensory modalities, people remember this experience for a very long time. There is something called smell autobiographical memory or scent memories, SCENT, scent memories. These are, ever since we are kids, we receive a lot of odors from our atmosphere, as I mentioned earlier. Odors that are associated with childhood experiences. Maybe the odor of upma that our mother makes, that stays with us for a long time. Maybe the odor of the pickle that our grandma used to make stays with us for a long time. It is so powerful in invoking memories and pleasant or unpleasant memories, feelings, emotions associated with that. And they have unconscious ways of governing our behavior in the present. So this is important. Then sensation and perception. Sensation is actually biochemical and neurological also. This is the impinging of the stimulus on the sensory receptor cells, impinging of the stimulus coming in contact with the receptor cells. This is mainly biochemical and neurological. When we talk about perception, it is how we make sense of the sensory information we receive. It is more associated with awareness and understanding of the sensory information we have just received. Then creating subconscious triggers influencing consumer perceptions. This is what I mentioned just earlier. There are certain unconscious triggers. This is what they call to increase the sales. I would, some of these manufacturers are very clever. So as one of their marketing strategies, they carefully crafted confusion so that on the surface, with your conscious attention, you may not notice anything, but subconscious things are triggered with very carefully crafted triggers. Subconscious triggers will make you purchase. See, this is one distinction I would like to mention here. Most people, consumers, when they go to a mall or when they go for any purchase, they think as adults, as highly educated people, they think they are making a lot of rational, logical conclusions or decisions when they are purchasing things. But most of the time, unknowingly or unconsciously, they are governed by a lot of emotions and preformed ideas or beliefs which is already there. Then vision and cognition, whatever you see and what we perceive, most of the time, we think what we see is what is there. It's not always so. There can be a lot of distortions in perception because physically what is there may not be what we actually perceive. So that is also there. Then taste and satiety. This is important where we come across a lot of, in the population, the problem of obesity and many other metabolic disorders are encountered. We actually don't stop consuming food when we have already reached satiety. Just because it is tasty, we go on eating. So there's a lot of interaction which goes on inside us, the cues that are present outside, a lot of things happen related to taste and satiety. Then sound, quality, imprinting, impacting consumer perception. Lot of sensory cues, as I mentioned earlier, in our present atmosphere or environment, they influence our perception of what we are seeing, what we are perceiving, and also how much decisions we make to purchase something, to eat something. A lot of things can happen. When there is some pleasant music playing in the background, for example, in a mall or supermarket, or even probably in a restaurant. When there is pleasant music, slow music, people tend to stay for longer duration, but they don't realize they have stayed for a longer duration. So this way, they're prone to make more purchases. And when they stay for a longer time in a restaurant for dining, they may order more food. So this is just one example for this. And consumer psychology, yes, this is a very vast area. I'll be just touching upon only few things. There is something called sensory dominance, where for example, when you take any one sense, visual, when you look at something, you see something and you decide or choose something, you come to a conclusion. When there are two or more senses interacting with one another, interplay of two or more senses, then there may be one sense which dominates. For example, when you are given two containers where the volume is same, only the shapes are different, then we tend to feel the container which is longer has more volume. So this is what is sensory dominance. Coming to drivers of sensory behavior, there is a model given by one professor called David Rock. He has given this acronym SCARF, S-C-A-R-F. S is status, C is certainty, A is autonomy, R is relatedness, and F is fairness. See, these are the drivers. We often wonder after coming home sometimes, why did I have to buy this? Actually, I didn't need this. And many a time, it is these drivers of behavior. And it is very fascinating to understand, to study these behavioral sciences, because why we do what we do is very fascinating. This status, when we want to maintain certain status, probably when you go for purchasing with someone very important, you want to influence that person, you want to impress that person. So you may end up buying something which you actually don't need, but just for the sake of status. Then certainty. When people are given certain information in advance, their need for certainty is satisfied. So they feel comfortable. So when salespeople talk about this has this much battery power, this and that, people feel happy. They want to try that experience. When there is uncertainty, it's another matter. When people crave for novelty and new things, their uncertainty is fine. But when you have to make an important investment, then certainty is a state people prefer. A is autonomy. When you are allowed to make choices, when you feel you have the power to make choices, you can choose what you want. That's something people prefer because their need for autonomy is satisfied. Then relatedness, how when you are in a group, how you relate to others, when people receive you happily, you feel you belong there. When you also have some kind of a car which your friends have or your colleagues have, you feel you belong there. So you tend to buy those things. Then last one is fairness. When we talk about consumer psychology, fairness is something people expect. For the amount they pay, it may be service or it may be a product. They expect fairness. This is that means their expectation is fulfilled. When they pay certain amount, when it's a business transaction between the manufacturer and the consumer, when your expectations are fulfilled, your need for fairness is fulfilled, satisfied. So you are happy. Then sensory congruence. This is another important factor where consumer psychology is concerned. When there is congruency between two senses, for example, sense of touch and sense of hearing. You go to a restaurant or a mall somewhere where the music is pleasant and also you have something soft to touch which is pleasing, you tend to stay longer in such places. And there is something called sensory conflict. This happens when your perception of certain things is blocked. When it is forcibly blocked or when some impediment is kept forcibly, this is what happens, sensory conflict, where you are unable to get complete picture using all your 5 senses. Then sensory overload is like you have information overload, sensory overload can also happen. When you have too many ingredients in a recipe or in a product, that may not make a great impression on the consumers. Whereas you may use 1 or 2 dominant notes or dominant sensory experiences in a product that may be liked better by the consumer and maybe the sales may go up. That is sensory overload. Then rational versus emotional overtones. There is one extra S here. As I mentioned earlier, most people think they are making very logical, rational choices and decisions where purchase is concerned, but it's not always so. They are more governed by emotional overtones. Now, this VR and AR technologies, virtual reality and augmented reality technologies.
Dr. Asha, can I just interrupt you a little bit?
Yes.
Since the time is almost up and we still need to take a few questions, could you please wind it up in 5 minutes, please?
Exactly. I think we have almost come to the end of it.
Yeah,
there are just a couple of slides. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm exceeding this. I'm sorry. Okay. This virtual reality and augmented reality technologies, they can be very useful when we talk about context enhancement. Virtual reality, this basically HMD or head mounted device. How you can use this in sensory analysis is you can create that kind of atmosphere only for that person. If you want to test some cold drink, for example, you can create whatever kind of atmosphere you want to and then make the person taste it. Then biometrics, earlier it used to be only whatever requirements you ask of the panelist and then you write down the judgments. Nowadays, there are different kinds of sensory responses which can be measured. How long your eyeballs focus on certain point and how many times you move your eyeballs. All these very basic and subtle responses from the panelists, even those things can be tracked, monitored, and deciphered. That's biometrics. Then imaging in food structure and food texture. Sorry, it should have been imaging in food texture and structure. This 2D and MRI imaging, they are being used in understanding the structure of foods and how it affects the texture of foods as perceived by human beings. It's actually literally like walking into cake, walking into bread or any other product. Now, computational gastronomy, this is the more recent one, like using the artificial intelligence and also this artificial neural network, ANN, that's what they call. You can create hundreds, thousands of different flavors or recipes using computers. This will capture data from various sources. This is related to all these data mining and such technologies. You can create recipes, lots of recipes and flavors. That's what is computational gastronomy. Now, there's a big paradigm shift, as we have all seen. Consumers are not the same as they were 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. They have changed priorities and their expectations are different now, and people are more health conscious, concerned about their health, and their values are now very different from the values of the previous generations. There's nothing wrong with it. Only thing is we need to change with the changing times. And there is one thing I have mentioned here, yoga as technology. As we are talking about integrating science and technology, yoga is one of the most primitive wisdom that we have, especially which originated in India. This can be used as technology for inner well-being and also for health benefits. Now, just two possibilities I have mentioned here about future research possibilities. One is yogic interventions as tools for lowering sensory thresholds, because this is something as a yoga practitioner I have personally experienced. The sensitivity increases. So instead of using a lot of things, medication and many other things are being used today, in case of diabetics and hypertension, alternatives are being suggested, and people have side effects and they may not be very happy with their sensory experiences. When artificial or intense sweeteners are used, they may have bitter aftertaste and so on. So if we can work on reducing our sensory thresholds, so even with small amount of sweetness, you are happy. You don't really need to have a lot of sweetness. So this is just an example. This is towards integrating science and technology, especially using natural means. The second one is sustainable freshness of foods through non-invasive and natural means. This is what I had in my main mind when Dr. Anuradha mentioned about food acoustics. So this is about vibrational imprinting of certain frequencies. This is what I have in my mind. I'm just writing the proposals. Next, this is our institute. I've come to the end of this webinar, CFTRI, Central Food Technological Research Institute, a beautiful palatial building where I work. So there may be others who have not seen this, so just wanted to show this pic. These are references and acknowledgement. I would like to place on record my sincere thanks to Dr. Sridevi and Annapurna Singh, Director, CSIR, CFTRI, Mysuru. Then team NSI. We have our conversation or this connection started with Dr. Subhadra Mandalika. Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Anuradha Shekhar, Dr. Krishna Kumari, then Dr. Rupali, Dr. Neha Sanwalka, and Mrs. Chandini Chopra, and there may be others who have directly or indirectly contributed for the successful conduct of the seminar. Especially, I thank my family and friends regarding the technical aspects in making this PowerPoint presentation. So
thank you so much, ma'am.
There's a small video, just about 40 seconds. I would just like to.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not coming. Yeah, that's all. And I just close this.
So thank you very much, ma'am, for that excellent.
I just have a small message. Tomorrow we are celebrating National Science Day. So let's use science and technology in a conscious, sensible, responsible way. The key aspect is conscious living. Thank you, everybody. Namaskar.
Sorry for disturbing you in the middle, but yeah, thank you so much for that lovely message. I think we all should be sharing that and abiding by that. So thank you once again for putting up such a lovely, I think I loved your PPT, ma'am, and the way you have, covered almost the entire scenario of sensory evaluation. It's not a very easy topic to cover in such a less time, but you did a fabulous job. So I'll start off with the first question. I am working on my final year project, interested to look into the emotional measurement of consumers in selected food products. What's your opinion on this?
Definitely, it should be encouraged, and this kind of data is not to be found much. Of course, there have been certain studies, because we always associate food, as I mentioned earlier, not just filling the stomach. Emotional components are definitely present. It would be a wonderful idea. She should go ahead with this.
What qualifications one needs to be in a sensory evaluation industry? Since there are a lot of students here, I'm asking you this question because most of them are thinking of getting into this field.
Sensory evaluation is actually not an industry. It's a part of science. Any basic degree should be fine, as long as they can understand English or any regional language. And the basic qualifications, as I mentioned in one of my earlier slides, like they have to have normal health and ability to communicate, ability to describe, discriminate, and motivation, interest. And if they can understand clearly the instructions and have interest and motivation, it should be fine.
Ma'am, there's one more question which is interesting. How to train a trained panel? Any validated method available? We generally do a threshold test, but that is hardly anything.
That was just tip of the iceberg, because I was running out of time. Actually, I had to go very fast. There are standard tests. Standard tests are available. So that can be used, those tests can be used for training the panelists. Standard tests are there with specific preparation methods, serving method, everything is specific. Standard tests are there.
So I now pass it on to Veena Yadi to select a few questions from the chat box. I think there are a lot of questions coming in now.
Yeah. There are many questions, but I think we have a shortage of time. So I'll just take 2-3 more questions.
As I mentioned, please do send the questions to my email ID. I will answer.
Yeah, sure. Okay, first of all, ma'am, let me thank you. I mean, it's a very difficult topic to cover it in 1.5 hours, but you have given excellent overview of this entire topic. Now, a few questions are there. One is that, many of our home science students specializing in nutrition, MSc or PhD level also, when they're developing any product, what is the expected error, experimental error? Because, our whatever the scores that we give, as you mentioned, there are so many factors. Though we have been trained and we have been selected on whatever basis of the test, we are the trained panelists. But is there, like, when we report our results, and then also connected to that, which statistical test will define best this kind of findings?
Yes, there are actually different kinds of statistical tests suggested for different kinds of tests. For QDA, as I mentioned, quantitative descriptive analysis, we can have this multivariate analysis like PCA, principal component analysis. So for each kind of test, for example, paired comparison test, threshold test, and triangle test, for different kinds of tests, we receive different kinds of set of data. There are specified statistical tests to test the validity of the collected data. This is one thing. And there is one more thing, I couldn't cover it because of the time constraint. There's a whole set of, there's a chapter on errors, physiological and psychological errors, bias. There is adaptation, there is enhancement, there is suppression physiologically. And under psychological errors or bias, there are some 10 listed, like halo effect, expectation error, then positional bias. There are so many things.
Is there any software you did mention, but can you name any software which we can use for analysis of, and how many minimum scores or values do we require for, use the statistical
It depends
test?
on the test. For example, you are conducting QDA, quantitative descriptive analysis, then many authors agree that even 5 highly trained or specialized panelists are sufficient. Suppose you are conducting paired comparison test or Duo-Trio test, then, or even ranking test, they suggest at least 20 to 25 panelists. It depends on the test. And there is one statistical software, it's called SPSS.
SPSS.
Quite useful. It's quite useful.
And is there ethical clearance required? Suppose if somebody wants to take a project only on the development of product and then, by making some variations of the same product, adding some functional foods or whatever.
See, actually, in Western countries, yes, they do follow this.
Correct.
And in India, when we recruit panelists, when we induct panelists, it is the duty of the panel leader to form a detailed questionnaire.
Yeah.
So a history about the person is taken, whether that person has any disorders or health conditions like diabetes, hypertension, or if he or she is allergic to any product, whether that person is vegetarian or non-vegetarian, detailed history is taken.
But do we need to apply for, recognized statistical organization, on this ethical body for the approval of our project?
There's nothing in India, at least as much as I can know. You need to, in Western countries, they do it, and it's good if we are also implementing that, to take an informed consent from the person, panelist. They do that. And before that, they'll also make sure the sample that is being served is microbiologically safe.
Yes.
Unless the microbiological
first thing is that, then the sensor.
Those things are all taken care of.
Okay. Now there's one question. Now you did mention about so many kinds of tests, parameters, attributes, sensory attributes. There's something, like after test, like these days, a lot of food additives are used.
Correct.
Even artificial sweeteners and all.
Yes.
So, like after test, if we want to evaluate that in our scorecard, what categories, how should we put? We can't put just whether good, liked or whatever.
No.
I don't know how it should.
No, when we make a detailed scorecard, that's why I mentioned about lexicon development using free choice profiling. So that's another procedure. A big procedure is there. We follow that. When we make a scorecard, how we make a scorecard specifically is, especially the scorecard pattern differs for various tests, obviously. So when we talk about QDA or profiling, this quantitative descriptive analysis, this is a systematic quantitative measurement of the response. So we have certain scales where people will be marking. There's a separate training for that. We have a separate training for that. And this particular scorecard will have attributes, like I mentioned in some of the earlier slides, like for color and appearance. Under that, you may have off-white or brown. And then it also relates to how the product looks. Is it clear? Is it hazy? So those points are also written there. I mean, taken care of. Then texture, then aroma. There are specific sensory attributes here. Aftertaste, see, when you cover taste attributes, under that you can say aftertaste specifically. And it may be bitterness. It may be lingering sweetness. So we have specific terminologies to describe the aftertaste experience. Residual or lingering is a word we often use.
One interesting question. I mean, two have come. I would like to combine. Like we say that 5 basic tests. Some people say 7 also. Fat also is included as one of the tests.
Correct.
Now somebody has asked, whether for weight control, like you said very well, the future, what you said is that the sensitivity at the low level you can make out. Especially I know, because many old people have seen geriatric, where, even if sugar is added in their chai, they feel nahi dala hai or dalwo. So that what you mentioned was very true. So somebody has asked the question, suppose you want to control weight. So for weight control, if so that person can eat less or, like something can you suggest so that, this test can be modified or something like, as you said. So anything can be done for any clinical application or I read your this introduction where that time you have worked a lot in the modified starch and, probably fat substitutes and all that. So because to reduce, because fat, the flavor jo hota hai, banta hai, wo thoda fat hota hai, to aur acha aata hai.
Correct. So, especially for the mouthfeel properties, fat is so much preferred. It's not just adding calories, the mouthfeel properties, especially when you talk about these garam pakodes and bhajis.
So do you think using some fat substitutes or, or any other technique that you can use so that people will eat less or they, and they won't put on weight? Somebody has asked for weight control. Can we use?
Okay, ma'am. One from my experience I can talk about is what I worked on was on modified starches. I worked on samosas and uridvadas.
Correct.
Both are fried snacks. One is from batter, one is from dough.
Right.
So I have treated certain starches, natural ones, without using the normal chemicals, what they use for starch modification, all those acids. I have not used that. What we normally use in everyday cooking, like citric acid.
Correct.
Or sodium, this cooking soda, sodium bicarbonate. So using very mild agents without drastic changes, morphological changes, I have prepared certain modified starches. I have incorporated that into these two products, especially fried products. They have drastically brought down the oil pickup, oil content in the product. So one is use of modified starches. This comes under substitution of ingredient category. This is related to product development.
Yeah, just 2-3 small questions because they are appearing again and again in the chat box. One is before I ask those 2 small questions. I recently read an article where that electronic nodes is used as a method for clinical diagnosis of some kinds of cancer, like some lung cancer or something.
Right.
So, are we using it in India also? Is it or it's a comparatively newer research?
Yes, this is actually a clinical or medicinal benefit. In that area, in the area of medicine, it is being used. See, what happens is where human beings cannot participate, that is one thing. Second thing, the sensitivity of this electronic nose is very high. Humans have built-in limitations because that is how we have been designed. So it's possible. Yes, it's useful.
Now, this last two questions which are here.
Veena, I think we will not take any more questions because people are leaving. I just want to thank because they have all connected today.
Please send the questions to my email ID.
Yes, Dr. Asha has been very, very sweet and very kind to answer each and every query that you have put in the chat box, and as well as sent us through your registrations. All these questions will be uploaded even on the YouTube message boxes. So don't worry, we are answering each and every question of yours. And so I'm coming to the last fact of this session today. So on behalf of NSI Mumbai chapter, I would really, really like to thank Dr. Asha for such an excellent presentation, and your PPT was awesome, madam. And I would like to thank Dr. Sashikaran and Dr. Menon for taking their time and joining us today. And to definitely my convener, Shubhadra, for a lovely treat on the Science Day. And to Dr. Veena and Rupali and other LEC members for always supporting and encouraging us in these endeavors. To my lovely SM team members for making the process easy to organize any event. To all my NSI members, going to be members, for your constant support. To all the energetic friends who have joined or gathered here and encouraged us and made this a lovely success. So again, I am thankful to each one of you, and I hope you have a lot of take back home messages today. Thank you, Asha, once again, from all of us, from all the bottom of my heart. I really thank you for being here with us today, and NSI Mumbai chapter will be very, very obliged. I now hand it over to Chandini for her message.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So before we officially end the session, I'll be sharing a few instructions for the much awaited receiving of the e-certificates. So the feedback link has already been shared with all the participants on your email address, along with the Zoom ID that you got yesterday evening. You will only be able to fill the form once we end the session today, as we will be activating the link after we end this particular Zoom meeting. And the link will be active till tomorrow midnight. So we request all of you to please fill the feedback form, as your feedback is very important to us. The certificate will be sent to all the participants by 15th of March. It will take us 10 to 15 days since there is a large number of registration. Please bear with us and kindly do not send us any emails asking for the certificate prior to this date. You can download and save the certificate from Google Drive link as soon as you receive it, because later it might not be available for downloading. So it's a request. You can all download and save the certificate on your computers or laptops. The session that you viewed today is going to be available on YouTube for viewing later as well. And it can be viewed using the link that has already been emailed to you, the YouTube link which has been sent on mail. Thank you so much. Have a pleasant evening. And thank you once again, Dr. Asha, for a lovely, insightful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Namaskar.
I will be ending the session. Thank you.